Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for True show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. It's a pleasure to have you back with us again tonight. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. And tonight, we're going to have a very special show. Before we start, many of you have been asking, how do I avail myself of all the previous episodes? How do I become a member? It's very simple. Click on YouTube. Click on A Time for Truth show. Hit the subscribe button. And you'll be one of our members. There's no charge. We'd love to have you. And the more of us that exists, the more truth that exists, the more this world becomes a better, more prosperous, safer place. And tonight we have a show about literacy, about education, getting ahead in life. And it's very interesting that according to the World Literacy Foundation, approximately 1 in 5 people globally are completely illiterate. And additionally, out of the about 8 billion people who live on our planet, about 3 billion people around the world struggle with reading and writing, which in today's world seems impossible to believe. And these problems for these 3 billion people lead not only to their own individual problems, but to community problems, national problems, global problems, with economies, with social strife, with violence, with the health impacts across the world. So tonight, we're very, very honored and lucky to have with us Annette Primiani. There you see her on the screen. BS, MS, educational consultant, workshop leader, professor, teacher, trainer, and humanitarian to the world as part of the World Literacy Crusade. As an educational specialist, she was part of the New York City Board of Education system in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, Brooklyn, the Bronx. She consulted with the school system of Curacao. She consulted with 20th Century Fox Film Productions and was assistant professor at California State University. Annette has directed programs in bilingual ESEL for teachers, for aides, for parents. She has advanced expertise in the barriers to educational study, in desegregation, in ESL, SSL workshops, in Mexican culture and heritage, in human relations, in words and color techniques, in remedial reading with script writing and puppetry, in multicultural education, and in success through communication, obtained at UCLA, Celebrity Center New York, Bank Street College, and Hunter College, amongst many others. Annette founded the Learning Connection T.L.C. Incorporated of Clearwater in 1980 as a tutorial center offering a variety of educational services to help students from gifted to autistic, from 3 years old to adulthood, to solve the major problems we're facing in education and illiteracy. And Engineer Buddha, if you bring her up live on the screen, we want to bid a warm welcome to Annette Primiani. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
It's an honor to have you. I had to cut your bio short because I was so afraid if I really mentioned everything you've done, the show would end before I spoke to you.
That's true.
There definitely is. So I want to really get to it. I want to ask you a question, although it may be dangerous for somebody so prolific to ask you this, but here we go. Tell us about your dreams as a young woman.
Well, I was at St. John's University, and it was ready for me to decide what my major was, my third year. And I said, I want to be a fashion designer. So my person who was helping me, the counselor, said, well, you need taxation law, you need bookkeeping, accounting. And I was like, I hate math. I don't want to do that. She said, well, what do you like? And I said, I love English. I love literature. I love reading. So she said, okay, well, we can get you going in an area of majoring in education and minoring in English. And that's what we did. So my last year of school, my fourth year, I had to do student teaching. So I was at a school in Bayside, Queens, a very, very, upper middle class school, lily white. Everything was very proper. And I thought, oh God, I made a mistake. This is not what I want to be doing. So one day we had a buddy school, which the kids were write to us, and they came by bus to visit for the day. And parents were very, very formal, and they had a very catered lunch, and everything was very, correct. Then the next day, we went to the South Bronx. So we get in the bus, and the bus drives us to the South Bronx, and it's extremely rough neighborhood. And it's a beat up school, a beat up, brick school building, PS 20. And we go inside the building, and it's a Black and Puerto Rican neighborhood. And it was so much fun because the parents made arroz con pollo, Puerto Rican style rice and beans. Then they had southern fried chicken and chickens, okay? And then, so the food was delicious. And my background is Italian. My family's from Italy. You see me with my hand shaking. And I'm used to home cooking and friendliness and all of that. So the environment was so inviting. Each kid put on a program. I mean, they put on a skit. They sang a song. They read us a poem. But it was personalized. And I said, oh man, I like this. I can work here. So I studied with this guy. I went to workshops every weekend on my dime, and I was really, really excited about applying it. However, when we did the testing, the reading part was higher than it had been, but the comprehension wasn't right. So at that point, I started looking, what am I going to find that's going to help with comprehension, understanding? And that's when what happens in New York as a teacher is you want salary increments, and they give you lists of courses that you can do to increase your salary if you do a certain number of courses. One of the courses was L. Ron Hubbard's Study Skills for Life, and another one was Basic Study Manual. So I did the Basic Study Manual and learned about how to understand when someone doesn't understand something, how they will start responding to it, and what the barriers are, what the things are that can actually stop you from learning. And so I used that information with the kids, and it made a huge difference. Suddenly the test scores in comprehension were much higher. Now, the barriers to study, like, well, what is that? How serious is it? And it wasn't hard to understand. It was easy because the barriers were very simple. No one would disagree with using a dictionary, making sure you look up words, making sure that you don't skip steps. For example, if you're doing algebra, you would have to understand multiplication before you did that. Otherwise, it would be skipping and you would be skipping steps. You don't want that. And you would have to have mass or manipulatives, which are things you could put in your hands and demonstrate. For example, you're studying about Africa. You need a map of Africa. You need the globe to see where things are located. Also, I use something called the Cuisenaire rods or algebraics. Those are materials that you use, which you move around with your hands, and you can get mathematical understanding with it. So I used all of that with that understanding and made sure the kids were understanding how to use a dictionary, looking up things they didn't understand, and it made a huge difference. Huge.
Well, I gotta tell you, it makes total sense to me because I remember at University of Connecticut taking Calculus 1 and being totally confused, proving theorems, all these different symbols that I don't want to give anyone on television. I thought I was totally a fool. I didn't know anything. And I've become a surgeon, obviously, since, but I really wish that I had met you with this study technology, if you say Mr. Hubbard, years ago, because it really, I went through so much and so much emotional turmoil on that course. I've never forgotten it. I wanted to ask you something because our world suffers from this, as I saw at the, when I was researching for your program. Give us a little bit of orientation of what you feel is happening with the literacy and the condition of education in our country.
Well, I am very much into diagnosing what is really going on and then coming up with an idea or a solution for it. I don't believe in labeling, okay? I believe in figuring out what's going on and then coming up with a solution for the problem. And when you have the information and the barriers to study, a lot of kids get diagnosed as, he's a behavior problem. He's a real problem in school. And it's really doesn't happen to be that way. It happens to be that the kid didn't understand something and he's starting to manifest, he's starting to act out. One of the barriers, which has to do with blowing, when you don't understand a word, you leave the area. How many times you have kids who go to the bathroom like 5 or 6 times in 1 hour? Now, they don't have a problem with their bladder. It's just that they're blowing from the area to get away from it because they don't understand something. And this happens repeatedly. I'll give you an example of another instance. Recently, somebody whose parents, do I have time to explain about this kid whose parents came to me because he was asked because he needs to be tested? There are issues here. Do I have time for that?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to do it. So I have this friend of mine who's a chiropractor, and she said, Annette, I need to come see you. My son they just told me he's in a Montessori school where kids, there's a lot of hands-on, but I was told rather, she said, that he had to be tested because there's some problems. So I said, okay, set up a meeting with the principal and teacher, and I'll come in and we'll talk about it. So we do. And I sit at the table with them, and they're very serious. Well, there are issues here. So I said, well, I do understand, basically, you want to label the kid. I do understand. I didn't say that. But I do understand that you want to find out what's going on. And but why don't we just fix the problem? Well, how much time would you need? I said, how about 2 months? No, we couldn't possibly. I said, well, how much time could I have? And they said, the most we could do is 2 weeks. So I said, Mom, would you do me a favor? Would you come in on the weekend? And we will do this in 2 weeks, even the weekends. She said, yes. So I said, fine. So I started working with him. He was 5 years old. I started working with him to get him to read and to understand what he was doing. And I went to the school, which I do frequently, and sat in the classroom to see what's going on here. What is it like? How is he acting in here? Well, he was walking around like a little zombie, like this. I'm not exaggerating. And the teacher was speaking in a very quiet voice. She had a very sweet voice, and she was talking to her class. Well, guess what? He was one of four boys. And the mom was like, come on, let in the car. Come on, we gotta go. Let's get in the car, get in the car. She didn't speak to them like that. He did not hear her. Okay. So I work with him, get him to read. He's reading simple books, simple words with these charts, and also understanding that he can't pass words he doesn't understand. And he's doing much better. And he's reading little books now. I said, honey, the last day I said, nobody's going to understand that you can read because it's unusual. So we did role playing. I said, I'm going to be your teacher, and you have to come up to me and prove to me you can read. And he's like, he's kind of shy, and he has the book. I go, sit down. Can't you see that I'm busy? And I do this with him in role playing to get him to become a little more aggressive, to show me that he can read. So finally, okay, and he shows me that he can read. So I said, great. So the next day, this is funny. The next day, his mom said, Annette, she calls me up. You are not going to believe it. I'm at school. I'm holding his hand in the hallway. We're walking down. Now, the principal and the teacher are standing in front of the door, and he runs away and screams, I can read! I can read! And he's holding his book up and starts reading to them. So, needless to say, he did not need testing. He demonstrated that he could read, but they were ready to label him. Okay, he would have been labeled like that, and it wasn't necessary. Okay, so we got the gradient in, got him reading at the right level, got him to pay attention because he was listening to what was going on. And I have lots of stories like that.
You know what I was going to say to you, what you went over is so important, because I know that from when my kids were young, there were those issues I know in our schools, and they really want to label kids. I really thought it was horrible, because imagine, once you label this kid's labeled for life, right?
Yes.
So that's horrific, because I don't think really that doesn't, one thing I know as a doctor, and that I try not to do, is sometimes we're guilty of just treating the symptoms and not taking care of the cause. So the first thing I want to do is to congratulate you that you actually went for the cause, and you actually were going to try and solve the problem rather than just giving it a name, giving a prescription, or, God knows what. So I really find this interesting. Why don't you go on with this? Because I know there's a lot of mothers and parents, fathers watching this show who will watch the show. So keep going with the story, because I think the story is the best thing we can do on the show. Continue.
Well, I started also writing kids' books because I was finding that the words in the books were over their heads, even if it was a beginning reader. And it wasn't done on a step-by-step level, and that was what was needed, step by step by step. And if they didn't understand something, you didn't move it forward. You stopped and you handled that, and then you moved on. So I've written 24 children's books. They are currently being published as we speak. And I also have another book coming out where I am actually going to be explaining how you can work with your children and teach them how to read. And underlying it is the barriers to study, Hubbard's barriers to study. That underlies everything I do. Because whatever you do, even if it's teaching a second language, because I do teach Spanish as well, that you have to make sure they understand what it is that you're going over with them and explaining. So that's part of this. So that will be available shortly. But I have many examples of this kind of thing going on, of kids, or even, let's say this guy, okay, who came to me, he was an adult, okay? He was a truck driver from Georgia. He had been driving a truck for 20 years, okay? No problem. He comes here, he's in Florida, he has to pass the test. He flunks it 3 times. He tries passing it and he fails it. So somehow he was sent to me. I don't remember if it was vocational rehab, but he was sent to me to help him. And I talked to him, and I had a friend who knew about this study technology and who also had been in the car business and understood cars and trucks. So I got the manual. They have study manuals, which are samples. And I got the study manual that he was supposed to study for the test, which he had failed 3 times. And I went over it. I had the guy go over it with my friend, who went over it with him and related it to the truck, showed him the truck engine, showed him how it worked, showed him how that related to the material. Then I went to the Department of Motor Vehicles and I said, look, I've got this guy. He's great. He's failed the test, but he freaks out on computers. Could he do it on paper? So they said, okay. So they let him do the test on paper. We had him go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. And guess what? He passed the test because he understood everything. It was related to math. Okay. And that followed, once again, the barriers, not letting barriers to study get in the way. So that's another story like that. But I have lots of those
Annette,
stories.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that, probably a lot of people are out there, they're wondering about these barriers to study, and you say they're from Hubbard, and you took this course, Basic Study Manual. So basically, how many barriers are there to study, and what are they?
There are 3 barriers to study. I have to make this a little louder so I can hear you. There are 3 barriers to study. Is that okay if I make it a teeny bit louder so I can hear you?
You sound fantastic. Continue.
Okay. So there are only 3 barriers to study. Okay. Number 1 is a misunderstood word or symbol. Now this seems like, well, that's pretty simple. Honestly, I had a little kid. This happens all the time with little kids. You have what's called lowercase letters. I don't have anything to write it with, but let's say you have an A and it looks like this, right? And it like that. Or it looks like, I'll try to make it in the air, like that and like that. Well, that's in some books. Well, the kid has been learning to read with a circle with a straight line as an A. So when he sees that symbol, this happened with one of my students. They look at it like they've never seen it before. So, for example, I had this little girl and I was teaching her the sound of which is the U. So it's down, up, and that's it. Well, the one that she saw was down, up, and down again, and a little curve. And I would say to her, okay, what is it? And she'd say, I say, good, honey. Now what is it here? And she'd look at me like, I'd say, okay, let's look over here. What is it? Good. Now what is it here? And I'm thinking, what? Why isn't she connecting it? And then it dawned on me, doing, this is a symbol which is not understood because it's a different way of presenting the U. How about an A? A capital A goes like that. That doesn't look like a lowercase a, but yet it's in books and kids look at it and they have no idea. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with their brain. It means there's a misunderstood symbol. Okay? Misunderstood word, misunderstood symbol. One of the two. That's one of the barriers to study. Another one is you skip a gradient. As I mentioned earlier, you're doing, let's say you're doing multiplication, but you do not know how to add or subtract. Well, guess what? That's a skipped gradient. You're not going to get through it. Okay, and then there's another one, which is a lack or an absence of physical mass. Mass is something solid that you can touch and feel. Okay? You're reading about Africa. Africa. Where's Africa? What's Africa? Well, you get them a globe and you show them on the map where Africa is located. Or you get photographs of Africa. You do things to make it more real to them what it is, where it's from. And that helps to understand when you're reading that you're not going by things that you don't understand. Now, another thing that happens, and this happened to me, now I'm an educator, I know about helping people. When I first moved to Clearwater, a lot of people, because I lived in Mexico before that, would come to me and say, could you show me some houses in your area? I want to see what it looks like around here. And I did. And then I said, why don't I make some money doing this? I could be a real estate agent. So I said, I'll take the test and I'll go to the school and I'll do the class, learn to be a real estate agent. So I'm sitting in the class, the guy is talking, the teacher, and I raised my hand because I didn't understand something. And he said, hold your questions to the end. Yikes. So guess what? I go blank. One of the manifestations One of the things that happens when you don't understand something is blankness. And I'm looking at what we're doing and studying, and I have no clue. I'm like, I'm gone. So I start making my shopping list for Publix. I say, Publix, this is what I have to buy tonight. I'm not there. I'm gone. Okay? Mentally gone. And that's because of a misunderstood word that he couldn't explain to me for whatever his reason. He wanted to hold it to the end. Okay. So I take the class. I go through what I go through. I drive. I go to pass to wherever they're having the test. I sit there. I'm ready to take the test. And I look at the test and I don't pass the test. I can't pass it because there's things on there. I have no clue what they're talking about. Now, we may have covered it in the other class, but I didn't understand it. And guess what? I failed the test. So I'm an educator. I know better, but I still failed the test. So I came home, looked up all the things I didn't understand. And there's a lot of Latin. When you're dealing with real estate, you're dealing with terms that are Latin. And I didn't understand them. So I looked them up, got through them. And then the second time I passed the test. But here it is. Once, okay, misunderstood words. And that happened to me. And it happened to everybody.
You know what, Annette? I think you're giving a lot of people hope. They probably have gone through this themselves. And unfortunately, we've come to the end of the show, but I love your stories, and I think they're very important because I think in our society, probably a lot of things are happening just because we have misunderstanding, don't understand the symbols, the words that you're talking about. If I would have you back, would you come back and tell some more stories?
Absolutely. I love telling stories. People love my stories.
I loved your stories.
Because they're so crazy, but they're true.
I thought they were wonderful. And you know what? I know the viewers would like it, the parents watching this. Unfortunately, we're out of time on the show. But really quickly, if they want to get a hold of you, what is your email?
Okay, the email is Learning Connection T.L.C. Inc. So it's Learning Connection T.L.C. Inc. at earthlink.net.
Again? Again?
Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon?
Repeat it again.
Okay, Learning Connection, TLC, INC, at earthlink.net.
Wonderful.
And then there's another.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, do you want to say?
No, I said that's wonderful. And unfortunately, we come to the end of the show. But you know what? We're going to have you back again. Get some more stories ready. And we're going to solve some of these problems that, from listening to you on this show, I can see are going on all across the country. I think people are going to be a little happier, have a little more hope. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed being here, and I enjoy your show.
Well, you know what? It's a show. It's called Time for Truth. You brought some levity. You brought some humor. We got a little bit of echo, and it's a time for truth. Thank you so much. And for those of you watching, look up those barriers to study with Hubbard. Have a very good night. We'll see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth show.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet